Welcome to part 3 of the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. My name is Matt, and I'm one of the pastors here at Faith. And today, we're continuing in this series we've been in based off of a book of the same title by John Mark Comer. And we have these books available in our lobby for $15 if you're interested in purchasing a copy and following along in the series as we go through it. The book title comes from a story told by another guy by the name of John. This guy's John Ortberg, who asked his mentor, Dallas Willard, this question. He said, how can I get spiritually healthy? How can I get into a healthy place spiritually? And Dallas answered, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. That's where we get the title of the series. And he went on to say that hurry is the greatest enemy of spiritual life in our day. Hurry is the greatest enemy to your marriage, to your family, to your friendships, to your career, to your finances, to all of these things, right? But above all, hurry is the greatest enemy to your spiritual life. And as we said a few weeks back, that the essence of our spiritual lives is to love God and to love others. But as we said, you cannot love in a hurry. Hurry and love are incompatible. Hurry is the greatest enemy to a life of love, of joy, and of peace. Hurry is the greatest enemy to the life that you truly want, a life that is spiritually healthy. And so this past Tuesday, I was in a hurry. Let me tell you this story. I was on my way to pick up my daughter from preschool, but there was horrible traffic. And what usually takes me 15 minutes took 45 minutes to get to her school. So I was already late, running in, and I finally get to her preschool. I park the car, I leave it running, get out, and I close the door behind me, and then I hear it click. All the doors lock. And my car locked me out while it's still running, but the worst part is my phone was locked in there too. And it's sitting up, right on the dashboard there where I kind of mount it there. And I managed to use my Apple Watch to text Alyssa, who is our friend who just happened to be in the area. And she came and picked up my daughter. And then I used my watch to call AAA from my watch because my phone was in the car. And my watch battery was on 3% battery life, right? Some of you, maybe you're getting stressed just thinking about this situation. But for 30 minutes, I sat outside my daughter's preschool with no phone and nothing to do. And so what did I do? Well, I just laughed and I prayed, God, you have quite the sense of humor. And he knew that I needed 30 minutes of uninterrupted time to just pause and pray, to get my head up from my phone and just look around and look up at the clouds above and, look at the parents who were pulling in who kind of were like, what's this creeper doing in the parking lot by himself? He knew I just needed to take a minute and pause, to not be defined by what I could accomplish in that amount of time, but to just sit and to be still. I'm addicted to my phone. Anyone else addicted to your phone, to your device, to your iPad? Maybe your kids are addicted to their iPads. A survey from Microsoft asks young adults this question. When nothing is occupying my attention, the first thing I do is reach for my phone. Is that true of you? See, 77% of young adults, 77% said yes, that's true. And isn't that true of you? And isn't it true of me that the second we feel a hint of boredom coming on, we reach for our smartphones to check our news feeds, to answer an email, to slay at Candy Crush, to pull up Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. We don't even know what it is to be bored anymore. Do you remember being bored back in like the mid-90s when you didn't have all these devices? But with all the information and entertainment of the world at our fingertips, why should we ever need to experience boredom? And yet, boredom has been linked with creativity. There was a study done in 2013 by a British psychologist by the name of Sandy Mann who divided subjects into two groups. And both groups were asked to come up with as many uses as possible for a plastic cup, to use their creativity, to find multiple uses for a plastic cup. But one group was first assigned the boring task of copying numbers from a phone book. Just copying numbers from a phone book. And as they did that, the bored group then went on to outperform the other group in the uses for a plastic cup. They were able to use their creativity because boredom leads to to creativity. Author J.K. Rowling was on a train in 1990 when an image of a scrawny boy with glasses just popped up into her head, into her mind. She didn't have a pen or a pad of paper, so for 4 hours on this train, she just used her imagination and boredom to think of all the ideas for a book and a series of books. Now, had she had an iPad loaded with Netflix of her favorite show, the Harry Potter books would have never been introduced to our world. Boredom leads to creativity. Boredom is a gift, but our world actively fights against boredom. I don't know if you've noticed, our world is pretty noisy. And our lives are oftentimes just filled to the brim with noise, whether it's audible noise with our ears or visual noise with our eyes. Several years back, there was something called the loudness wars. And the idea of these loudness wars is that over the course of 2 decades, music continued to get louder and louder and louder. And some of you are like, amen, right? But the reason for this is that audio engineers and musicians continued to abuse compression and limiting when they would master music. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to try to show this to you. Here is a picture of 2 sound waves, right? Left and right, 2 audio channels. And the top one, see, these are both actually the same song by Michael Jackson, the song Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. The first recording on the top is from its original release in 1983. But over the course of 2 decades, the song was re-released in the year 2001 after being produced and mastered. You could see just how full this second audio clip is, how full it is, right? The more you use compression and limiting, the less dynamic range you have because the loud parts are brought down and the soft parts are brought up until everything just kind of sounds the same volume, and then you can just increase that to full volume. And that's what has happened for 2 decades, over the course of 2 decades. And artists would just want their music to be louder and louder to compete with others. But the greatest music has dynamic range, right? Think about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, right? The loud parts are loud, da 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 da, da 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 da. The quiet parts are quiet. Right? If you know that song, that piece, right? It's about the dynamics between the forte and the piano. And this is not about what style of music you listen to. Maybe you like classical, maybe you like jazz, maybe you like rock, right? It's not about the style of music. It's about whatever style of music having those range of dynamics. And if music is just full on, in your face death metal, every moment, every second, you're only living your life at one volume. But is this not a picture of how our lives feel at times? Where there's no variation to the rhythms and the volume of our lives. It's just volume at 11 all the time. When was the last time you got in your car and you didn't turn on the radio or a podcast or an audiobook or music? See, when I get in the car, that's the first thing I do. I need a soundtrack to my drive. Without it, life feels empty. It feels silent. And we have an aversion to silence as human beings. Many of us, we actually might fear it. It's a legitimate fear called sedatophobia, the fear of silence. And this can be the result of traumatic experience in your life or a negative episode. Silence can remind us of the reality of death, anticipating our impending doom. And maybe that's you. Maybe the movie A Quiet Place ruined silence for you. Thanks, John Krasinski, for that. But when it comes to noise, there's not just the external noise. There's external, but there's also internal noise. Now, the external is kind of easy to deal with, right? Turn off the radio. Turn off your TV. Turn off your toddler, right? If you only could, right? But find a quiet space. That's what it means to have that external noise that's turned down. It's easy to deal with, or easier than internal noise. Internal noise is that more subtle noise. It's the internal commentary, that never-ending commentary in your head about everything that's happening in real time. It's that replaying of a conversation that you wish you could have said something different, and now you're just laying in bed just thinking about that horrible thing you said. It's those emails you know you need to respond to, but you just can't find the time to, but it's just nagging in the back of your brain. It's those fantasies Maybe just not those lustful thoughts, but maybe it's just a fantasy of getting revenge on someone who wronged you. It's the worry. It's the comparing. It's the dreaming of the perfect life that's distracting you from the life that you're living right now. But here's a question. What if we've been using the external noise to drown out the internal noise? What if we're so uncomfortable with silence because that external silence reminds us of the internal noise within? See, here's the thing. All of us have needs. We have needs. We have these deep longings of our soul. And these are formed in questions like, who am I? What's my purpose? What am I called to? Why am I here? You know, we don't always ask these questions out loud, but they're these deep longings of our hearts. And the problem is that we might look to the noise to answer these things. We might look to our job or our career or our girlfriend or boyfriend or our spouse or our kids to find meaning and purpose in our lives. We expect the noise to meet our needs. And is that not true? We expect these things and these people and these things to just meet the needs of our soul. Rather than slow down, we pour ourselves into more work. We try to give our kids something that we didn't have growing up by just involving them in as many things as we can, just get involved in this and that and that. We try to find our purpose in whatever title or role we can play. But it's never enough. It's never enough to truly meet that deep-seated need of our soul. Maybe we even bring these needs before God in prayer. We say, God, help me to know my purpose. Help me to know who I am, why I'm here on this earth, what's my calling. But our prayers, they feel one-sided. And we wonder, God, where are you? Why aren't you speaking to me? Perhaps, just perhaps, God is speaking, but we're too distracted to hear him. In an age where the only way to get someone's attention is an all-caps rant on social media, or to turn up the music to 11 to compete with everything else that's happening around you. And God just says, I don't play that game. If you want to hear from me, you have to slow down. You have to be still and know that I'm God. The noise of our world deafens us to the voice of our God. And all the noise, the internal and the external, it robs us of being present to God. It robs us of being present to other people. As we said, you can't love God and you can't love others in a hurry. And the same is true when our lives are noisy. You can't be present on a date with someone if you're constantly checking your phone. And you can't be present with God when there's so much noise in your life. But there's good news. And last week we looked at the greatest invitation that we are given, that Jesus invites us to follow him. Not just to believe in things about him, but to actually follow him, to adopt his lifestyle and his practices. And if you want to have the life of a successful businessman or woman, you're going to read their biographies to see how they lived their life. What decisions did they make with their schedules and with their time? What were their habits and their routines? Now we have not just one biography of Jesus, not just 2 or 3. We have 4 biographies about Jesus, and they're called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, written after the people who wrote them. But most of the time when we read these books, we're looking at them to see, what did Jesus say? You know, we read them trying to gain some spiritual nugget of truth for our day. But we fail to step back and to look at the bigger picture of how Jesus lived his life. So for the rest of this series, we're going to be doing just that. We're going to be looking at 4 practices of Jesus' life. And sometimes we call these practices spiritual disciplines. You can call them habits, but the idea is the same. We're looking at the way Jesus lived his life, the routines and practices he engaged in. Now, James Clear was the author of the book Atomic Habits, and he writes this. He says, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. Here's the thing. You have habits. I have habits. We all have habits. The question is not, the question is this. It's, are we intentional with our habits? Are the habits that we're engaged in producing the results that we truly want? I think for many of us, we want the life of Jesus. Yes, that would be the dream. But we don't want the lifestyle of Jesus. This weekend, I'm going to be hiking up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. A group of us are hiking 18 miles through 6 4,000-footer mountains of New Hampshire. And over the past few weeks, I've been training for this. But I'll just confess, there's been moments during the training where I just wanted to quit. I've been tempted to just quit and just hope for the best on this hike and just, maybe I'll just be able to wing it and be fine, right? And I know that if I want to go to the summit, I got to push through some sweat. Like, that's the truth of it. And a lot of us, we want the summit. We want to get to the top of a mountain. We want to achieve something big in our lives, but we don't want the sweat it's going to take to get there. And the same is true spiritually. If you want the life of Jesus, you have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. But I want to make something clear here. The question for us is not, how can I leave my life to live Jesus' life? How can I abandon my family and leave my job and remove myself from my situation? No, Jesus is not calling you to do those things. The question is, how would Jesus live my life if he were me? How would he live my life? How would he spend his time if he were me? Jesus was not a dad. Jesus was not a single mom. He was not an accountant. He was not a CEO. And Jesus isn't asking you to throw that away. But he wants you to ask this question, Jesus, how would you live my life? How would you do this? And my assumption is that if we were to truly ask Jesus that, I think he would say, I would slow the heck down. I really think Jesus would slow down. And in the context of what we're talking about today, he would turn the noise down. So today we're going to look at the first practice of Jesus, silence and solitude. What can silence and solitude offer to us in this hurried, loud, volume at 11 world that we're living in? We're going to look at Jesus' life to discover how this practice can enable us to be present with God in order to find our purpose to the questions and the needs and the longings of our hearts. And in the Gospel of Mark, one of the biographies about Jesus' life, Mark writes this. He says, at that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." I mean, come on. Would we not all love to hear God speak those words over us? The audible voice of God, the heavens open up. This was a moment, a holy and amazing moment in Jesus' life. Talk about purpose. Jesus heard the Father speak purpose and identity over him at his baptism. Have you ever had a moment with God like this, where maybe you didn't hear the audible voice of God, but you could sense his presence with you? Maybe it was a moment in worship where just a song spoke to you or a message that was spoken to you. This was that kind of moment for Jesus. It was the launch pad from which he would be sent out into the world, into service, into the kingdom that he was building. But in the very next sentence, it says this. It says, at once, there's no hesitation here. At once, the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by Satan. This is whiplash. Jesus was having this mountaintop experience, and then immediately he's in the wilderness. The Greek word for wilderness is this word eremos. And that's the Greek word for it. It's used 32 times in the Gospels. And it can be translated in several ways. Wilderness is what we see here, but it can be translated desert or deserted place, solitary place, lonely place, quiet place. And Jesus has a unique experience and relationship with the eremos, which we're going to look at. But this is his first recorded experience with the eremos. And it's the most important because this is his starting point for his ministry. This is his starting point. And notice something here. It says that the Spirit is the one who sent him out into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. Why would God do that? Why would God send Jesus from this amazing moment into the wilderness, where we're told he was alone and he fasted for 40 days. He's starving. He's lonely. And then the devil comes and Jesus has to do battle with the devil. Why, God? See, a lot of us look at the wilderness as a place of weakness. And we might conclude, well, isn't that just like the devil? Isn't that what he does? He gets us when we're hungry, alone, tired, and weak. But in the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer points out that we've got it backwards. The wilderness is not a place of weakness. It's a place of strength. And it's in the wilderness that Jesus spends these 40 days in prayer and fasting and was able to then conquer the temptation of the devil. And guess what? After 40 days, Jesus is not done with the wilderness. This wasn't like a bucket list trip. All right, I'm going to do this wilderness adventure trip and go out for 40 days and then just check it off my list. I've done it. No, Jesus, in another one of Jesus' biographies, the Gospel of Luke writes that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. The Greek word for lonely places, eremos, same word that we see here. The same word for the wilderness. Jesus would frequently go back to the wilderness, go back to the eremos, the lonely place. Now, let me take you through the rest of Mark chapter 1. It essentially reads as Jesus' first day on the job. He goes from the wilderness, from this place where he's tempted, and he starts his ministry, preaching the gospel, calling his disciples, inviting them to follow him, teaching in the synagogue. Then he goes to one of his disciples' home, his mother-in-law, Peter's mother-in-law, and he heals her. And that night, it says that the whole city was gathered together at the door where Jesus was staying. And he stayed up throughout the night, healing the sick, casting out demons. Coming from the silence of the wilderness, this would have been an insanely noisy day. I mean, could it get even more busy and even more noisy than it is? What would you do after a long day at the office where you just came back from vacation, right? And you come back to all these emails, and what would you do? I'd probably sleep in, go out to brunch, take it easy the next day. But then it says this. It says very early. Like we're talking, like it's still dark out. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. He left the house and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Jesus got up while it was still dark, went back to a solitary place. What's the word there in Greek? You guessed it, eremos. He went right back to the very same place that he just came from. I want to make sure you hear this loud and clear. Jesus spent a month and a half in the wilderness, came back to Capernaum for one day of busy activity, and then he went right back to the wilderness to pray. This quiet place was not a one-time thing. It wasn't a bucket list trip. It was an ongoing rhythm that Jesus embodied. But then it says this. I love this. It says that Simon Peter and his companions went to look for Jesus. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you." And Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." Parents of young children, have you ever gone to the bathroom just to be alone? Right? Just pretended to be in the bathroom just to be alone? All right, admit it. Like that might be your wilderness. Maybe that's your quiet place. Just this past week, I needed a few minutes of quiet. So I went into the bathroom and locked the door. And I was doing my one-year Bible in the bathroom. And my 4-year-old comes and I see her fingers underneath the door. Just see her fingers, doing this. "Hi, Daddy. Daddy, can I come in? Daddy, what are you doing in there? Daddy, why does it take you 6 hours to poop? Daddy?" And she's just going on and on. I'm trying to be still, right? Maybe you've been there too. See, Jesus, I think he's that's kind of what this is. Jesus knows what it's like to have all these people that want and vie for your attention. And he comes from the wilderness and his disciples are like, Jesus, what are you doing? Hey, everybody's looking for you. Come on, right? Notice Simon's exasperation. He wants to capitalize on this publicity. Jesus, you just healed people through the night. You just did this amazing thing. Everybody loves your teachings. Let's go give the people what they want. This is why you're here. This movement needs to grow. Let's do some networking. Let's do a TikTok reel. I hear one guy has connections with some powerful people, right? Maybe we can increase our financial revenue, get some more followers. And Jesus just calmly says, "Nah, I'm good. Let's go to the next town. so I can preach there also, because that's why I'm here. That's my purpose. Jesus comes out of the wilderness. Don't miss this. Jesus comes out of the wilderness with purpose, with direction. His time in the silence and solitude gave him navigation. He came out knowing who he was, why he was here, and he was committed to following the Father's plans, following God's plan. And so many of us, we might pray every day. Maybe you pray the Lord's Prayer, and that part where it says, your kingdom come, your will be done. But how many of us actually stop to ask if the work we're doing is really for God's kingdom or for our kingdom? And we see throughout Jesus' life and his ministry this constant rhythm of returning to that quiet place, the eremos, the wilderness, the lonely place, the solitary place. Jesus was busy. His life, it was noisy. But the busier that he got and the noisier his business became, the more he went to the quiet place to pray. And for us, it's usually the opposite. The busier my life gets, the first thing I lose is my quiet place. When life becomes more demanding for you, you stop praying, you stop reflecting, you stop thinking, and you start just turning up the noise. That's what we do. We expect the noise to meet our needs, and you just fill our lives with more noise. But silence and solitude give us navigation through the noise. Silence and solitude gives us navigation through the noise of our lives. And just as Jesus came out of the wilderness with a sense of purpose and calling, you and I need to find a silent space before God daily to make sense of this noise, of our noisy lives. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. It doesn't matter if you've got 8 kids or 2 kids. It doesn't matter if you're working 40 hours or 60 hours or 20 hours. You need silence. You need solitude. Because out of silence comes purpose, power, and the presence of God. The noise will never give us that. Silence and solitude can. These days, it's hard to go anywhere without hearing talks about mindfulness. I love how John Mark Comer puts it in his book. He said, mindfulness is simply silence and solitude for a secular society. It's the same thing, just missing the best part, Jesus. See, we oftentimes associate meditation with Eastern religions like Buddhism or Hinduism. But let me tell you, this is a Christian practice. Meditation has been around with Christians for thousands of years. So we shouldn't just write it off as like new agey or psychology. Meditation is about connecting with the Father's heart to get answers to the questions and the longings and the needs of our soul. Like, who am I? Why am I here? See, these questions are not meant to be answered by the noise, but by the voice of your Heavenly Father. So practically, how do we do this? Well, the first step is this. You have to define your desert. Define it. One guy in my small group this past week said for him, it's his closet. And that's his war room where he goes to battle. Maybe it's a certain chair of your house or a park bench. Mine has shifted in different seasons of my life. There was a busy season where I had no private space in my house, so it was my car. And I would drive to drop off my daughter at daycare, and then I would go to a local park, and I would just park the car and spend 15 minutes with God. Wherever it is, define your desert and then make it your daily destination. Go there often. Jesus did. And let me say, if Jesus, who is God himself, prioritized silence and solitude, how much more do we need it? Come on. How much more do we need it? We're not God, and Jesus made that a priority. So go there daily. But make sure your desert's realistic. Don't say the mountain or the ocean if you can't go there daily. Make it realistic. Come on. And then, what do you do when you're there? The first step, quiet the external noise. Silence your phone. Turn off whatever you can turn off. Tell your family that when mommy's in this place, it's mommy's Jesus' time, right? Mommy's Jesus time. Quiet the external noise and then quiet the internal noise with grace. The to-do list, the inner critic in your brain, the distracting thoughts, whatever it is, just shut it up. Shut it up. But do it with grace. And I say with grace because your mind will wander. Let me just tell you that. If you think that you have to be perfect, your mind is going to wander, but you have to give yourself grace. Don't beat yourself up. Just bring your attention back to your Heavenly Father. The goal is not perfection, but progress. The goal is to be available to God. It's to tune the dial of your heart to His frequency, to quiet yourself before God, to experience that loving union, to abide in Him. For me, my desert is my kitchen table. Every morning I wake up around 5:30, I make a cup of coffee, and I pray the Lord's Prayer slowly. And then I open my one-year Bible to the day that it is, and I just kind of let that speak to me. And then I have these kind of truths that I speak over myself. I call them daily declarations. And then finally, I pray for other people, for my family, staff, leaders, for my small group. And you don't have to do it the way I do it, but you have to have a quiet place. Maybe you have a quiet place. Maybe you have a quiet time in the mornings, but you find yourself rushing out of that space into the rest of your day, unaware of distractions and noise. I want to tell you about an app that we've highlighted here before. It's called the Pause app, and it's available in any app store for free. And it's a Christian meditation app that's designed to help you take a pause in your day to spend just a minute or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 in silence and solitude. And it's a powerful tool that can help facilitate this practice in your life of silence and solitude, a way for you to connect to God's heart. In fact, we're going to do this right here, right now, and we're going to practice this. And I realize that maybe as you're watching this, you might have kids in the room. Maybe there's other people watching with you. Maybe you need to hit pause if you're distracted by other things, and just come back to this when you're in a more quiet, silent space. I'm going to give you permission to do that right now. Go ahead, hit pause if you got to. But otherwise, we're going to continue with this practice with an excerpt from the Pause app. And author and pastor John Eldredge is going to take us through this guided meditation. So as you do it, you can either close your eyes or you can read the words on the screen silently, and he'll take you through some of these prompts that you can just pray inwardly. So let's begin.
Give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you. Jesus, I give everyone and everything to you. I give everyone and everything to you, God. What do you need to let go of? I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me. Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, heal my union with you. I love you. I believe you. I worship you. Restore our union, Lord. Heal and restore our union. that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. I pray for more of you, God. Fill me with more of you. I pray the river of life would fill me, restore me, renew me, surround me. I need more of you, God. Saturate me with your love. Saturate me with your life. That's good. That's enough for now.